once again, we are diving into the Am I the Arsehole subreddit and looking at some autism related posts. Basically, people come on this subreddit when they think they may have done something wrong, or people are telling them they've done something wrong, but they're not sure, and they come to ask, the forum what they think. Also, before we get started, I am wearing sushi earrings today. If you can't see, they're quite small. They're one of the first pair of novelty earrings I bought. And I was like, oh, I haven't worn those yet. I'll put those ones out there. The first one is, am I the arsehole for trying to get my son diagnosed for autism? For autism, that's a new one. Against his will. Okay, recently I, female 58, have been having trouble with my son, male 15, because I think he should get evaluated for autism and he doesn't want to go to the assessment. I'm unsure about whether he is autistic, but I just want the best for him and to be able to help him. And although I don't recognize any symptoms of autism in him myself, my friend, female 51, who's a therapist, says it's quite likely he has it. Although she hasn't spoken to him in quite a few years, she seems very certain about the conclusion, and since she's a therapist, I trust her understanding of this topic. Okay, what sort of therapist? The word therapist is not always super regulated. It can mean a lot of different things. It could mean a psychiatrist, it could mean a psychologist, it could mean a counselor, it could mean somebody who is trained in something related to autism, like sometimes you might say an ABA therapist, which is a very controversial therapy. I don't know what this friend's qualifications are, and also she's not seeing him in a clinical setting, regardless that she hasn't seen him for a few years. If you don't deeply know somebody, how would you know? Like, has she been a lifelong friend and she was there with him growing up nearly every day, and she works with autistic people all the time and she really recognized traits? It just sounds almost like she made a throwaway comment, but then it also sounds like her friend is very certain that he's autistic. I don't know, this feels a bit uncomfortable. I could see maybe why this one feels a bit like it feels a bit invasive, maybe. I trust her understanding of the topic. My son has done his own research and does not identify with any of the symptoms. Now, if you first just type in, symptoms of autism, traits of autism, a lot of it is based on very young children. There is still this idea from some people that autism is a children's condition, and yeah, you probably are likely to see things like doesn't respond to their name, things like that are very based on childhood, so a 15-year-old might struggle to relate to it. I think there probably are a lot of autistic people who would initially read the traits and go, that's not me, that doesn't describe me. And obviously we do know there are things like autistic masking, like some people are able to appear normal. Autistic people may be able to improve with their social skills. By the time someone's 15, they've probably learned quite a lot about how to interact with people, so it might be more difficult at that point to see yourself reflected in the diagnostic criteria. Because autism is a neurodevelopmental condition, it's a bit more complicated to diagnose. You have to look back at someone's childhood, you have to look at somebody's whole life. My son has done his own research, does not identify with any of the symptoms, which he's quite sure of, but I still want to go through it because I trust my friend. But what about your child? There's not a reason. It's not like he really needs help with this particular thing. I think he needs extra time in exams. He's really struggling with school. He's taking loads of days off. Like, maybe there are things like that, but she's not said them here. I just don't understand. Like, if neither of you, neither your son nor him, think he's autistic and it's literally based off something your friend said, like, why? Why? When my son saw the email I sent to the autism diagnosis clinic, he was upset for two reasons. Why did he come across this email? Firstly, he believes that the symptoms I put in my application were more to do with my personal grievances towards him than a good faith list of symptoms. Well, that is true. I think sometimes parents might have a certain perspective on their child that maybe like somebody impartial wouldn't have. And while it may be true that I exaggerated some things, it's because I wanted to list everything that may possibly point to autism in my application. Exaggerated some things. I think when you go for an autism diagnosis, obviously a lot of us, we want to be prepared. We create a folder, we make sure all the information is there, but I don't know about exaggerating. I think making sure that you get every trait that you can think of and you list anecdotes that you can kind of use as examples is important. If you have to exaggerate, then why do you think he's autistic? Like, I'm somebody who a lot of people would look at and go, oh, she doesn't look autistic, oh, she's not really autistic, blah, blah, blah. I don't feel like I had to exaggerate. I don't feel like I had to exaggerate anything, and neither did anybody in my life, because I do have traits. It feels a bit icky, yeah. It's because I want to list everything that may possibly point to autism. Yeah, but if you just want to list everything, that doesn't mean you have to exaggerate it. Some examples of my inputs were emotional immaturity and struggling to keep friends. I mean, do many people have emotional maturity at 15? You've got another 10 years, haven't you, until your brain is fully developed or whatever? It's not really a trait of autism either, being emotionally immature. He says that a lot of the things I input were to do with his anxiety and the trauma that came from his father's abuse. Oh no. And that I should mention that alongside them in the application at least. Now this is interesting because some people actually do struggle with getting an autism diagnosis. They can be very sure that they're autistic, but then people keep kind of insisting, oh no, it's trauma. This happened to you, it's trauma. It's complicated because most people do have some amount of trauma. Obviously this person that says abuse by their father, but living in general, most of us have been through difficult things, obviously not to the same level. It's not just like spread out equal trauma between people. People have been through absolutely horrific things that of course are going to influence your life. But I also think sometimes as a society we kind of downplay genetics and, you know, the way your brain is wired and neurodivergence and these kind of things. Like there can be other reasons. For me, I had quite I guess it was sort of a turbulent early life in that my dad left when I was 4 years old. We then moved to a new country. We lived there for a year and a half and then we moved back to England again. And then when I would have meltdowns, it would be, well, of course, Meg is upset and distressed, you know? There's all these things that have happened. I read a Ryan Kelly's book and did a review recently on my Patreon. It made me cry. It was really, really hard to read. He had this very difficult experience in his early life and he put that in his book and he said he did this to emphasize that, you know, trauma didn't make him autistic. Autistic people can obviously experience trauma and sometimes things can be more intense for us, so we can be perhaps even more traumatized. Just because you have trauma doesn't mean you should dismiss the fact that you could be autistic, but it does sound like she should probably be listening to her son. I didn't intend for him to see the application and feel really guilty for hurting him. Secondly, the assessment cost £2,000, yeah, which is a lot for our family, but I believe that it is worth it if it will help my son. He says that he feels very uncomfortable with me spending so much money on it because he'd feel responsible. Always sounds like a really nice guy. Emotional immaturity. That's really kind of him to be thinking about your finances. Like, I feel like a lot of children and teenagers don't really think about their parents' financial situation that much. But I wish he'd understand that it's my decision, so he shouldn't feel bad. But it also sounds like he just doesn't want the diagnosis, or he doesn't feel like he needs it. I mean, I wonder how I would have felt if someone mentioned to me that I was autistic at 15. Would I have been open to the idea? You know, that's the thing. Sometimes autistic people are not super open to the idea that they could be autistic. You know, I think we spent our whole lives trying really hard to be normal, so it can be a bit like, no, I don't think I do want this label actually that signals me out. You don't owe it to the universe that he has a stamp of autism on him. If he really needs help in school, if he's struggling with things, sometimes you can get accommodations that allow you to leave the classroom when you get overwhelmed and things like that. You can just leave and there'll be no questions asked and your teachers are aware of it. If he needs accommodations like that, or, you know, he is having meltdowns when he gets home from school, or he seems very, very withdrawn, then it's probably a good idea to maybe see about getting a diagnosis for him. If he does get the diagnosis, it's not going to do anything for him unless he wants to use it to get accommodations. And if he doesn't feel like he needs anything, then maybe he's not autistic. And you know what, maybe he is autistic, but maybe he'll be more willing to come around to it. Autistic people do tend to struggle. The older they get, the more the responsibilities in life kind of ramp up. So if he is autistic, you know, there is a likelihood that he may find the need to get the diagnosis himself. Do you have anyone who's autistic in your family as well? Because it's usually genetic. I don't know. If not, then that may be another reason to think, well, perhaps he's not autistic. You could have a lot of undiagnosed autistic people in your family, I suppose, though, so it's difficult to know. He says he feels very uncomfortable with me spending so much money. Our interactions recently have been very strained. I feel that he is still angry at me, but I don't know what to do because I believe I am doing the right thing. I want to look after him and I view this as a part of it. Okay, but what is the outcome going to be? Because if he doesn't actually feel like he needs any support and help in life, there's not really a medication that he needs to be on. The NHS says, you know, autism is not an illness, your brain just works with differently. A lot of the time when we get a diagnosis, particularly later in life, it's kind of one of the main reasons is validation. And if he doesn't actually think he's autistic and you've exaggerated things on the report, like, I don't know if anyone's going to be super happy with this outcome or if there's going to be any positive to spending this £2,000. In conclusion, I'm unsure as to whether this is a mistake in my parenting or not. I may be the arsehole because I've upset my son so much, but I might not be because I believe I'm doing the right thing for him in the long run. My verdict is definitely you're the arsehole. I feel like he is old enough to know himself. Obviously, he's not an adult, but I think by that age, you do have some self-insight. If you go ahead with it, he's gonna feel not heard, not seen, not listened to, not respected. I think I would drop it. I think I would leave it until there is some actual concrete reason rather than just somebody said to think that he might be autistic. Maybe she just doesn't want to share all those reasons here, but like nothing that she shared has made me feel like, yes, he needs to get a diagnosis. He really needs help and support right now. Who knows? But I just feel like by that age, I would be respecting my child and I would feel like it would be something that we would discuss together and then come to a conclusion, unless I could see that they really, really, really needed help. And I felt like their perspective on it, wasn't clear. Like, obviously, as a parent, you do kind of have the right to make the final say, but at the same time, if you want your children to like you as they get older, you kind of might want to involve them in big things that change their life. It will be there on his medical record. And if you're exaggerating and you twist things and make it more likely for him to get the diagnosis, whether he's autistic or not, that's there on his medical record. If he one day comes to the conclusion that he's not autistic, then he'll have to try and get that removed and stuff. I don't know. It's just strange. Anyway, let's have a look at the comments. You are the asshole. He also says some of the things I input were due to his anxiety and trauma that came from his father's abuse. If this is for real, maybe your son could use a therapist, but it needs to be one who'll actually work with him on whatever his issues are and not just rubber stamp your dodgy armchair diagnosis. Your friend's one. You could probably use one too to figure out why you're doing this, which holds true even if you're trolling, by the way. I don't think they are trolling. I don't get the vibe of trolling. I get the vibe of like kind of fussy, controlling sort of parent, maybe, who kind of feels like they're doing the right thing but is not listening to their child, which I think is probably what he needs more than anything, more than any diagnosis from the sound of things, particularly if he's had abuse from his father. Like, just to feel like your parents are on your side, they're not going against you. You are the asshole. As an autism inclusivity advocate in the UK who was diagnosed later in life, every single sentence I read made me angrier at you. Every last thing is about you, not him. Do you think it is a bit of a mindset of like, I need to be a good parent and I need to get this sorted out, rather than thinking about what's actually best for him? I hope it isn't for appearance's sake, like a friend is like really in her ear sort of telling her again and again, or maybe you should get him assessed or whatever. This is a way to kind of lose your child's trust for sure. Yeah, someone said you are the asshole. Your son is old enough that he should be able to weigh in decisions like this. Yeah, emotional maturity is not expected from a 15-year-old. His brain hasn't fully developed yet and his hormones are all over the place. Not to mention that most people have some kind of symptoms that fit the autism criteria because it's basically an umbrella term. I don't know, I don't really necessarily feel like most people have a major trait of autism. I don't know, you might have a few things that you kind of relate to or you experience on a lesser level that you can connect with an autistic person with, because obviously autistic people are human and we all have human experiences. I don't know, I don't think about people in my life and I'm like, oh yeah, you meet that criteria for autism but not the rest of it. It's like, I don't know, it feels like it's either you are or you're not, but just that maybe most people are not qualified to detect whether people are autistic or not. Because like I say, it's complicated, it's difficult, you have to look back over someone's whole life, which is why I'm personally not a fan of armchair diagnosis. I think self-identifying is a very different thing because you live in your own head. You have a lot of information about how your mind works because you live in it, Maybe sometimes we're not always as self-aware as we think and our perspective can be warped by things and stuff like that, but I think your lived experience of being you should be respected sometimes more than it is. Mother, you are the asshole. I think somewhere you probably have good intentions. When we say asshole on this forum, it just means I think you are in the wrong as well. It doesn't necessarily mean I'm calling you an asshole. Let's see the next post. Am I the asshole for getting mad at my parents after they didn't tell me about my autism diagnosis until 12 years after I was diagnosed? We had a similar post to this in the past, but it was the other way around. It was the parents asking, are we the asshole for not telling our daughter? Imagine if it's the same. We're like getting the other side of the story 12 years after. And I've had quite a lot of people message me and just tell me in comments of videos that they had a really similar experience, particularly with ADHD as well. Being diagnosed as a child, parents kind of dismissing it or going like, I don't want my child to be labeled with this. I don't want them to be stigmatized. I'm just not going to tell them. And then the child finding out later in life and saying, oh, I think maybe I'm this. And then they're like, oh yeah, you were diagnosed with that. And they're like, okay, would have been kind of nice to know, because the problem is even when you don't have a label, you still feel different. You still know that you are different, and it's just having that label sometimes can be reassuring. Sometimes I think parents think they're doing it for good reasons, like, they don't want you to be judged by people. You don't necessarily have to go around with a sign above the head flashing, being like, my child is, neurodivergent. You can be selective about who you tell, but for them to know and for you to accept it and then accept that they may need certain accommodations, I think that that's very important. When I, 16 female, was 4 years old, I was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, later updated to autism spectrum disorder, due to the fact that Asperger's isn't a valid diagnosis in the US anymore. I was kept out of the loop for a very long time. I had recently started dating an autistic guy, 15 male, and being the nice person I am, I did some research on autism so I could understand his condition, and autistic people are often kind of subconsciously drawn to each other. The more I researched it, The more I realized I seemed autistic myself, I decided to tell my parents, saying I suspect I'm autistic and I'd like to get tested if it was okay with them. Turns out I was diagnosed when I was 4. And it was constantly written off by my parents as being special, in quotation marks. So that's kind of the derogatory use of the word special. So they're saying, you know, my parents didn't want to use that label about me, basically. I was really, really pissed with my parents for not telling me. They said they didn't want me to think I was too different and or a freak. It's definitely some ableism, some very negative opinions about autism that have influenced why they did this. I mean, freak was a word that was used to describe me as an insult in school, even when I was undiagnosed. Those are people will still notice if you're different, and they will still very much point it out for you, and it will still have an impact on your life, because whether you use the label autistic or ADHD or not, you still are autistic or ADHD. It doesn't change that. Just having your head in the sand and expecting your child to just push through and, you know, go unsupported, because they can't be getting any supports if you've not told them, and they can't be looking into things themselves. You know, like, she's 16, she could have been researching things herself, she could have found an online community, and now she hasn't been able to do that. They really didn't want me to think I was too different, but I struggled so much in school. Yep, and now I know just why I did. I told my parents I want them to try to get me more help in school. According to my dad, I don't need it, and I would be taken away from someone who actually needed it. Who are the people who actually need it? You know, she says she struggles so much in school. Why would you not believe your child? I don't understand. How would her getting extra time in exams or being able to leave the classroom if she was feeling overwhelmed, things like that, how is that taking away from anybody else? It's going to make your daughter's life easier, and it's going to make it that she's, you know, more likely to succeed. Would you want her to drop out of education and not be able to get a job? Is that going to make her less of a freak, as they say? If you want autistic people to thrive in life, we do often need more supports. And, you know, like, some of us will survive if we don't access supports, but doesn't necessarily mean, you know, we've had the best outcome that we could have had, you know? So yeah, I would just love to know, like, what would she actually be doing that would be stealing anything from anybody else? I just think I don't want to see my child as in some way disabled, or I don't want to associate my child with what I think autism is. I got mad and yelled, I wish you were more honest with me, you secretive jerks. I got grounded for saying that. Am I the asshole? No, you are not the asshole. The parents are most certainly the asshole. Yes, they should have been honest, and they were being secretive jerks. I imagine I would be really, really upset, and I would really struggle to trust and to forgive my parents, particularly if they knew that I'd been struggling, although it sounds like these parents probably wouldn't be very supportive if she had shared that she was struggling, so I wouldn't be surprised if she hadn't even bothered sharing it with them. And the other one that we responded to, I think a lot of people were saying, like, don't be surprised if your child goes non-contact. With both of these parents in both of these posts, I do think, you know, these parents are at risk of potentially seriously, if they haven't already, seriously damaging their relationships with their children. And why do you want to do that? Like, your child's going to be an adult one day. Surely you want them to want to spend time with you and to respect you as a person, and if you show them absolutely no respect, they're not going to respect you. Not the asshole. It's actually super common for parents with autistic children to just pretend like the diagnosis isn't there. Because of our own pre-existing stigma, they're in denial and you're being stuck with the consequences. OP replied and said, apparently since I speak, I completely shut down on occasions when I'm incredibly stressed and cannot talk in those situations at all. I don't need any help from school, and I just need to be less lazy. Who knows, maybe the parents or one of the parents is undiagnosed themselves and they feel like, well, I'm similar to you and I just had to struggle through, so you have to as well. I don't understand these parents who are just so negative about their children. It's like, you raised them. Why do you think you raised a lazy person? It's like, you know, it doesn't sound like this person's lazy. They decided to go and research autism, took it upon themselves to research autism in order to help their partner. You know, they sound like a very caring person. It just feels like some parents really want to believe like negative things about their child, or like just internalize stereotypes about young people or something. I don't know. Not the asshole. Go public. Call your family doctor and tell them. Talk to your school counselor. Call other family members. Post it on social media. You need to light a fire under their ass. It's so unacceptable. They can't deny it if everybody knows. I mean, I think only if you want to share it, only if you feel comfortable with sharing it. I wouldn't, you know, necessarily try and weaponize it just to get them back, because obviously, like, it's a big personal thing to share. Obviously, there's no reason to be ashamed of being autistic, but it is still personal and you don't necessarily want to blast that all over social media, or maybe you do, and that's completely valid. Look, here I am. And what will this solve? This is the reality for many neurodivergent people, and people just don't care, or they'll try to push OP into seeing their parents' perspective. OP, talk to your school counselor to see if you can access any support in school. Yeah, that's true. You don't need your parents to come in and ask for support for you. I don't think, anyway. Maybe some schools do require decide that, which seems a bit awful, but I think, no, if you told your school counsellor, hopefully they would support you. If you go to university, you'll be able to self-declare your diagnosis and access support, like extended deadlines. Yeah, I guess I'd just try and access support on your own, unfortunately. If they're not going to be there, maybe you could try and slowly like share things with them if you find resources about autism to kind of help them to not see it as a stigmatized thing and break down this image of autism that they have, which, you know, isn't entirely their fault and is probably a generational thing to some extent. And yeah, maybe sharing with them, you know, lists of celebrities who are diagnosed and who are open about being autistic, and, you know, being like, look, it's not the end of the world, it's not a death sentence to have this label, it's not gonna, you know, mean that I definitely have negative outcomes in life, but, you know, going unsupported and undiagnosed, that is connected to negative life outcomes. I don't know, maybe it's just going to take them a bit of time to come around, maybe they won't, but you're 16, so hopefully, yeah, it won't be too long until you can move out and go to university or college and live your own life. Someone said, seek out a counsellor for more help at school and to discover what rights you have, and also let them know your parents ignored your diagnosis. Yeah, hopefully there'll be other people who can understand and support you even if your parents don't, and then maybe they will come around down the line, particularly if you have an autistic boyfriend as well. Maybe that might help. I don't know, if they get to know him and they see similar traits and they see that he is diagnosed and look, he's still, you know, a person, he's still existing. It is such a shame, and I do feel like, you know, even though your child is younger than you or whatever, like, it is their medical record. I do feel like they deserve to know, even if, you know, you find it difficult to talk about or whatever it is. But who knows, maybe she has an undiagnosed parent or something, and I think that can make things tricky sometimes if they're like, well, this is a normal way to be, and it's like, yes, it is normal for you, and, you know, autistic people are normal, but it also is an autistic trait and is something that, you know, your daughter may have needed support with. And I'm sorry if anybody has had this happen to them as well, and I hope you were able to access supports eventually. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to see more videos from me, I want to, you know, make more of the, you know, bigger essay videos that take quite a lot of time and research. So if you would like to support me over on Patreon, if you would like to see those videos, you can do. The lowest tier is $4 a month, and you get access to the Discord server, so you can chat to other autistic people, make autistic friends, people who suspect they might be autistic, or people who are otherwise neurodivergent. And then you also get exclusive videos. There are loads on there. I don't know how many, but a lot at this stage that you can watch through, and a lot more to come, and then podcast episodes and outtakes on the higher tiers as well. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video very soon. Bye.